show you some of the new materials that I've added to the course. And since we are reading novels by choice and discussing small parts of the novels in class, there's going to be a slightly different format to how class moves. One of the most important things in this revision of the format is the description of the novel James and why he wrote it, and also a discussion of Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain that you can link to here from Percival Everett, the author of James. There's also a quiz about that because I think he makes really interesting points about the relevance of Huck Finn today and what we can learn from Twain and from James in today's world. There's a few different formats in which you can listen to or read a document, and the picture of George Griffin, the man who many scholars believe Mark Twain based the character of Jim on. Also, here we have another version of the beginning of James with a little bit more text for us to look at. Now, in class, we also looked at a couple of other things that you won't be able to see on the Zoom recording of the class. And the first thing is still difficult to see. Let me check quickly. Here we go. Here's my Adobe version that I can't get to go straight in Blackboard. The reason I introduced this document is because it is, as you'll hear in the video, a document put together by Frances Harper and Frederick Douglass and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Wendell Phillips, essentially a group of men and women, black and white, whose goal at this time in 1864 was to secure the right of suffrage to all citizens without distinction of race or sex. 5 years later, that glorious plan fell apart and women did not earn the right to vote, and this coalition of men and women, black and white, fell apart. Nonetheless, the ideal is something that I think is really important and something that we might emulate in today's world as we work together to make the world how we would like to see it. The second item, and these are both archival items, I probably can't even tell you where I got them, but this is just how I researched the time period in addition to reading the novels and poems, etc. The newspaper in which Frances Ellen Watkins Harper published 3 of her 4 novels is called The Christian Recorder. She published Minnie's Sacrifice in 1869 at a time of Reconstruction optimism, but she started to see support fall away for African American voters and leaders even in 1869. Again, this is 5 years after the document that I showed you prior, the Equal Rights Convention. 5 years later, in 1874, African Americans were very much acutely aware that the United States government was no longer going to protect African Americans in the South or necessarily black voting rights. Many states started to vote in grandfather clauses, etc. at this time period. And the reaction of the leaders of this important instrument of the African Methodist Episcopal Church was to change the masthead of their newspaper, which was just a pretty picture of the words The Christian Recorder, to this image of Africa somewhat at the center of the world, and the ribbon of the Christian Recorder placed over Africa, as well as the biblical Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. And we've talked a little bit about Christian republicanism in class. Radical Republicans very often carried a Christian conviction for the way and the reason that equality would come about, that it was in some ways God's plan. And here, as African Americans move forward creating HBCs, schools, hospitals, independent communities, they looked to this important biblical message to move forward despite the lack of support from the federal government. This is one of the documents that I discussed but that you can't see on the recording. there is the picture of George Griffin, Twain's butler. And, pardon me while I go back to our class, we also talked about, because of what Everett says regarding language, we talked about the ways that someone can understand the perspectives historically of African Americans and of all people in that time period, through considering language. Now, I thought I had already uploaded this, but let me do that again. I referred back to Dunbar's poem Sympathy, and this is here, and I will link it again, because Dunbar had two very different ways of using language, and we discussed that in class, and you hear that on the recording as well. So I will upload this into the proper place on Blackboard so you can see all of the things that might not be in the current video. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to talking about this some more on Thursday.